Imagine stepping back 20,000 years. Picture a world just cloaked in ice, a landscape so brutally harsh, it seems. Well, utterly impossible for humans to not just survive, but to actually thrive.
Yeah.
Yet the evidence now shows they absolutely did. Okay, let's unpack this. For this deep dive, we're heading to Australia's majestic Blue Mountains. And there's some groundbreaking new research there. It isn't just, unearthing ancient rocks and tools. It's fundamentally rewriting the timeline of human adaptability in some of the most extreme environments on Earth, really.
It is. It's a remarkable shift in perspective, actually. For a very long time, the traditional view was, well, that Australia's Eastern Highlands, especially during the Last Glacial Maximum, that incredibly cold peak of the Ice Age, that basically acted as a kind of cold climate barrier, stopped people moving through. But this new research, the one published in Nature Human Behavior, it directly challenges that long-held model. It gives us definitive evidence, proof, really, of high-altitude occupation. It forces us to rethink just how resilient, how adaptable early humans truly were.
Right. So our mission today, for you listening, is to transport you back to that icy reality in the Blue Mountains. We'll explore what daily life was like, this incredibly challenging environment, and what the archaeological finds at one particular site reveal, and maybe most importantly, what these discoveries mean for our understanding of, well, human ingenuity, ancient connections, and the enduring cultural heritage of Australia. Okay, let's really set the scene then. Imagine the Blue Mountains, 20,000 years ago. The research focuses on this site called Dargan Shelter. It's perched way up high, 1,073 meters. Researchers describe the upper reaches there as, get this, treeless, with ridgelines and mountain peaks, laden in snow and ice. It just sounds incredibly cold and barren, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how anyone could possibly make a home there, even just temporarily.
And those descriptions are absolutely critical. They reflect the periglacial conditions. We're talking about environments right at the edge of vast ice sheets. Temperatures would have been, well, the estimate is at least 8.2 degrees Celsius cooler than today. That's a huge difference. Wow, yeah.
And the tree line, where they could actually find wood for fires, that was approximately 400 meters below the site.
400 meters? That's quite a hike down and back up, presumably, for firewood.
Exactly, meaning local firewood would have been incredibly scarce, very hard work to get, plus water sources were likely frozen through winter, just solid ice.
Okay, so freezing temperatures, no trees nearby, frozen water. It sounds impossible.
It does sound that way. But what's fascinating, what the research clearly indicates, is that Dargan Shelter was repeatedly visited during this cold period.
Repeatedly visited. So they weren't just passing through once and thinking never again. They kept coming back. But how did archaeologists even find Dargan Shelter? And, what made it such a prime location for these kinds of discoveries?
Well, the shelter itself is quite striking. It's described as an ancient rock shelter resembling a large amphitheater. Big, open, but sheltered. It was chosen for excavation for a few key reasons. First, it's a location. It sits right on a known Aboriginal traveling route. That immediately hints at its historical significance. Okay, so people were already known to be moving through that area.
Precisely. Second, obviously, it's high elevation. That was crucial for testing the barrier hypothesis. And third, critically, it had the potential for deep and undisturbed deposits. These deposits are like time capsules, what we call stratigraphic layers. They let researchers reconstruct past activities within distinct periods. Layer by layer, you go back through time.
Like reading pages in a history book, but underground. And what did those deep, undisturbed layers actually reveal?
Something truly definitive. Dargan Shelter provides the earliest known evidence of high-altitude occupation in Australia. Full stop. It establishes the Blue Mountains as Australia's most archaeologically significant periglacial landscape.
Wow, the most significant.
Yes, and the dating backs this up. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal from multiple in situ hearths.
Which means campfires found exactly where they were originally built and used.
Exactly, not disturbed. Those indicate a continuous human presence from about 22,000 to 19,000 years ago. Right smack bang in the middle of that last glacial maximum we mentioned.
During the absolute coldest part.
Yes. And in total, they unearthed 693 stone artifacts.
693. That's a lot of evidence.
It's a substantial amount. Nearly 700 individual pieces, each one, a direct touch point to someone living and working there. And out of those, 117 flakes The small pieces struck off when making tools came from those really deep layers, older than 16,000 years. They even discovered a small amount of faded rock art,
Rock art too? What kind?
including a child-sized hand stencil and 2 forearm stencils.
A child's hand stencil. Wow. That's incredibly poignant, isn't it? It just adds such a human dimension to these ancient findings. Brings it to life.
It absolutely does. And it's important to note this wasn't just, a quick dig. It was a rigorous collaborative project. It involved archaeologists and the Blue Mountains Indigenous Advisory Committee, conducted under an Aboriginal Heritage Impact Permit with meticulous excavation down to 2.3 meters. Deep, careful work.
Right. Respectful and thorough.
Deeply respectful, yes. And careful unraveling of that history.
Okay, now you mentioned the stone artifacts. This is where I think it gets really captivating. The story embedded in those stones. You said most were local, but some were distinctly exotic, meaning they came from far, far away. What does that tell us?
Yes. This is a huge piece of the puzzle. It tells us not just about where people lived, but how they moved, how they connected. They found 10 fine-grained cryptocrystalline flakes. That's a type of very high-quality stone, perfect for making sharp tools. These were identified as coming from the Jenolan Caves area. That's approximately 50 kilometers to the southwest.
50 kilometers?
50 kilometers. And these date to around 16,000, 17,000 years ago. This strongly suggests a southern entry to the region during the LGM. People were coming up from the south.
50 kilometers is no small trek, especially not in Ice Age conditions with snow and ice everywhere. That's remarkable. But you said it doesn't stop there.
Exactly. They also found 3 artifacts made of ferruginous black quartzite, a specific type of rock. One was a hammerstone. These were matched to material originating way up in the Hunter Valley region. That's 150 kilometers to the north.
150 kilometers
Yeah.
north.
Yes. And these dated to around 15,000 and 18,500 years ago. So this indicates connections from or connected to the north as well.
So connections south, connections north, over vast distances.
Precisely. So if you put this all together, Dargan Shelter wasn't just some, isolated remote outpost where people hunkered down. It was probably an important stopover point. Maybe for people attending gatherings, ceremonies. That could have included people from way out in the western interior, maybe the Cumberland coastal plains, and definitely country to the north and south.
So it completely refutes that idea of the mountains just being a barrier.
Absolutely. It points to active, purposeful travel through this demanding landscape. It highlights a vast network, a connected community.
Okay, so these weren't just individual families struggling in isolation. There was clearly a broader community, cultural exchange happening. That shifts our understanding dramatically. Beyond these sort of grand journeys and connections, what do the artifacts tell us about day-to-day existence, life within the shelter itself? What were these Ice Age occupants actually doing to survive and thrive up there?
Well, the artifacts give us a pretty clear glimpse into their adaptations, their ingenuity. For instance, they found a sandstone grinding slab. This one was dated to about 13,000 years ago, and it showed abrasive wear consistent with shaping bone or wooden artifacts. Things like needles, awls, bone points, maybe even nose points.
So tools for making other things, not just basic cutting tools, needles, awls, that suggests sewing, detailed work.
Exactly. It suggests a sophisticated level of craftsmanship, making specialized items.
A grinding slab for bone and wood implies they were processing materials for specific purposes, not just basic survival. What else did they find from daily life?
Well, another interesting find, this one from the early Holocene period, so a bit later, around 8,800 years ago, was a basalt anvil. And this anvil had impact marks on it, consistent with cracking hard woody nuts and seed shells.
Okay, so processing food resources too, getting at tough nuts and seeds.
Right. These tools, especially that grinding slab for tool making, really speak to a complex strategy. Resource processing in a very challenging environment. And the evidence for continuous occupation also shows how they adapted as conditions changed over millennia. For example, intensive hearth construction, building more substantial, bigger campfires became more common later in the Holocene.
Why then?
Well, probably because timber became more available as the climate warmed slightly and the tree line moved back up the slopes.
Oh, okay, so they adapted their fire making based on resource availability. Shows a dynamic response.
Exactly, a dynamic response to the changing climate over thousands of years.
Now, beyond the purely scientific data, the rocks and dates, this research obviously holds profound cultural perspectives. It reveals tangible and intangible cultural values for Aboriginal people. I heard the research team showed immense respect during the excavation. You mentioned the collaboration, but I also heard about A lyrebird song and dance.
Yes, they did. They paid respects to country and ancestors before starting, and they performed a song and dance, and the researchers recounted how actual lyrebirds were drawn to the cave entrance, seemingly singing back in response.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really emphasizes the living connection. For millennia, Aboriginal people have passed down the knowledge and stories of country, and this site, being on a known traveling route, it just embodies that continuity. This research is so vital because it allows Aboriginal people who have connections to the Blue Mountains to begin to stitch back together much of the history and many of the stories that until now have had gaps. It's about recovering a narrative that was perhaps partially lost or fragmented.
Stitching history back together.
Yeah.
That's powerful. And that leads us to a really important discussion about recognition, doesn't it? The Blue Mountains area was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site back in 2000. But that was for its outstanding biodiversity values, its nature. Apparently, a parallel nomination for cultural values listing failed due to a paucity of archaeological and cultural heritage information. A lack of proof, basically.
So what does all this new evidence mean for the future of that cultural recognition?
Well, it means a great deal. This new research provides precisely the kind of robust, deep-time archaeological evidence that was previously lacking. It should absolutely be considered really front and center in any new nomination for the UNESCO World Heritage Area. To encompass cultural heritage right alongside biodiversity, they are intertwined. It definitively recognizes that Aboriginal people have walked, lived, and thrived in the Blue Mountains for thousands of years, and that these mountains are, for them, a tangible connection to our ancestors. So it adds that crucial layer of deep human history, thousands of years of cultural significance, to a place already globally recognized for its natural beauty.
Exactly. It completes the picture, in a way.
And, this deep dive, it feels like it isn't just a regional Australian story, is it? It connects to something much bigger, a truly global narrative about human resilience.
Absolutely. That's a key point. The Dargan Shelter findings, they align Australia, really for the first time, with Ice Age data from the world's other inhabited continents. We're talking about high-altitude sites from the same period in places maybe we wouldn't immediately associate with Ice Age survival, like parts of Mexico or Spain.
Mexico and Spain had similar high-altitude occupations during the Ice Age.
Yes, evidence is emerging from various high-altitude regions globally. It powerfully illustrates what the researchers call a truly global story of people entering and living in high-altitude landscapes during the last Ice Age. And this fundamentally challenges that long-held assumption, that really pervasive idea that such cold, high climates were simply natural barriers to human mobility and occupation.
So it wasn't a barrier anywhere, necessarily.
It seems not universally, no. It shows that human ingenuity, human adaptability, it's a universal trait. Across continents, across deep time, humans found a way. So to sort of sum up this deep dive into Dargan Shelter, it conclusively shows that human occupation of Australia's high-altitude mountains wasn't just, sporadic or accidental. It was a persistent, adaptable presence, right through the very peak of the Last Glacial Maximum. And that fundamentally shifts our understanding, not just of Australian prehistory, but of human resilience on a global scale.
It really does. Thinking about this incredible journey of discovering what truly stands out to you, it's just astonishing, isn't it, to consider the capacity of ancient humans, not just to survive in such a place, but to actively create networks, innovate tools, maintain deep cultural connections across these formidable landscapes. Imagine the courage, the sheer ingenuity, and the profound cultural knowledge it must have taken for these ancestors to navigate and truly thrive in such an unforgiving, icy landscape. What can these ancient stories, these stories of adaptation and connection, teach us today? About our own human spirit, maybe, and our relationship with the environment. Something to think about.